We received a referral for a genealogy question regarding a family album. Inside the album are a bunch of portraits of different people, making us feel like this was a pocket album that someone would have taken either to go away to school or to go to war. This was inside of a box that contained a number of other family photographs and documents, all pertaining to direct line ancestors. So the person who owned this album passed it down to their child, having not looked inside of it and having received it from their parent. And inside of this small pocket album, inside of this box, there was a curious photograph. The photograph in question was a miniature tintype of a skull, two actually, and they were on the same page with regular photographs of young people. So this was very perplexing. There were several guesses as to why there could be tintype photos of a skull inside of a family album. The client had even attempted to evaluate if the skull looked like it could be the skull of any of her own relatives. Or it could have been a war trophy or an archaeological specimen. Or what if someone had gone to Yale and was a member of the Skull and Bones Society? Was it possibly an early or clandestine Masonic lodge prop? So we consulted the help of a Civil War researcher that we know, and together we dated the album to around the 1860s. We were able to determine this date based on the photo technology used in combination with the clothing, which indicated that the subject came from a wealthy family and was also at the height of fashion. We began to look at the family tree to look for clues, but nothing was immediately apparent. Meanwhile, we worked on attempting to determine an ethnicity estimate for the skull, which proved difficult. All of the consulting anthropologists agreed that it was likely male. However, an ancestry estimate could not be easily agreed upon, partially because of the size and quality of the photograph. We decided to use contextual information and the skull features to see what emerged. The client had some photos of known ancestors who appeared to be the same individual as one of the two on the album page with the skulls, but a few years older. These were CDVs or cabinet cards, so they were definitely taken a little later. We 3D rotated the faces to be at the same angle and did a superimposition to see if they were the same individual. We believe that they are. The photos were taken at the studios in Rhode Island and in Boston. We were able to determine that one of the photos was of the client's great-great-grandfather, Charles W. Parker, who owned a massive men's clothing store in Boston, but there was still no explanation for the skull. We found advertisements for his store marketed to MIT and Harvard students. He was clearly very invested in higher education. Charles W. Parker, however, did not go to college. He went directly into business via an apprenticeship. He also did not have a Massachusetts Mason membership record. We thought he might have had a child who went to Harvard or MIT, who might have had a photo of a medical or archaeological specimen, but that would not explain the age of the photographs. We also considered the possibility that he may have collected it as a curiosity while traveling the world as an importer of fine goods. We then found that Charles had a brother, Edgar, who was an artist. He painted a portrait of John Greenleaf Whittier and of a president of Harvard College, Ezekiel Price Greenleaf. We thought perhaps that the skull was used in an art class. We felt even more sure that it could be Edgar's photo album after finding evidence of Civil War service and confirming that the young man pictured in the album most frequently was his older brother, which makes sense to take away with you to war. It was surprising that the cover of the album was in such good shape if it had been taken off to war, though. Edgar had no surviving descendants, so it made sense that his belongings would be in the possession of his brother's descendants. We also found evidence that he was a Massachusetts Mason, having joined after the war ended. As we learned more about Edgar's fame as a painter, we discovered that he was self-taught as an artist. This shot down the theory of the skull being from a prestigious college art class that he might have taken prior to the war, and we were back to square one. We found an account of Edgar's life which referred to him as Surgeon Parker. Then we found that Edgar had been an instructor at the military academy in New York prior to his years at Harvard Medical School from 1860 to 1863. Civil War researcher Jen Morley provided this summary of what she called a quintessential Gettysburg event. Assistant Surgeon Edgar Parker had graduated from Harvard Medical School only months earlier on March 13, 1863, receiving his commission with the 13th Massachusetts within the week. Parker had the opportunity to utilize his surgical skills in the Second Battle of Fredericksburg and the Battle of Chancellorsville before he found himself on the steps of the Christ Lutheran Church on July 1, 1863. Earlier in the day, unarmed chaplain Horatio Howell of the 90th Pennsylvania was shot and killed on the same steps Parker and Colonel S.H. Leonard were wounded. Parker and Leonard were both cared for by Jenny McCreary, a Gettysburg resident who lived very near the church. Parker was wounded in the forehead and was discharged due to his wounds on September 18, 1863. In a later pension request, Parker describes an additional incident in which his horse was shot from beneath him and he was violently thrown to the ground. While he was seemingly not injured at the time, he testified in an 1892 pension request that the initially unnoticed injury eventually left him without the use of his legs, saying that he required constant care and assistance. With Edgar's service being cut very short by injury combined with his educational background lining up with our photo's timeline, we were feeling confident that the skull photo came from Edgar's time at Harvard. We continued to explore possible origins of the skull. Looking at Edgar's graduating class at Harvard Medical, we found many people with the surname Warren. The Warrens' family connection to Harvard Medical goes back to its founder, John Warren. John Warren's son, John Collins Warren, was an early adopter of general anesthesia and also exhumed his uncle essentially to conduct his own forensic examination. Joseph Warren, the brother of John Warren, had been exhumed and reinterred many times because of various reasons, including disputes about his death. We invite you to do your own research on this as well and report your findings to us. It's a very interesting line of inquiry, and there are many conflicting and differing viewpoints on it. So we'd like to hear what you find. Lithographs of Joseph Warren's skull were produced contemporary to the time this skull tintype photo was taken. The original daguerreotype of Warren's skull shows it displayed on a brocaded tablecloth either identical to or extremely similar to that of the one the tintype skull sits on, lending more credence to the theory that it was the standard staging area for skull photography at Harvard Medical at this time period. We were able to tell immediately upon comparison that the tintype skull is not Joseph Warren's skull. So whose skull is it? During this time period, there was great difficulty in acquiring medical specimens for colleges, so there were, amongst the students and teaching bodies, secret groups that knew where to get what they needed. Recently deceased unclaimed bodies from poorhouses and asylums and interments in paupers' fields were the most common sources. John Warren himself, sometimes with the help of a family friend, John Revere, the son of Paul Revere, took it upon themselves to exhume those who Warren determined to not be most entitled to respect, which meant everyone who wasn't wealthy and recognizable. Usually this meant poor people, minorities, executed felons, and suicides, anyone whose family wouldn't miss them or notice their grave being recently disturbed. These groups, called spunkers or resurrectionists, were responsible for the greater part of Harvard Medical's early specimen collection. Coincidentally or not, they were also all known early Freemasons. John Collins Warren's portrait shows him posing with a skull on a similar or identical cloth on a table as well. Another graduate of Harvard and grandson of John Warren, Thomas Dwight, is also photographed posing with a skull on a similar tablecloth and table in 1896 during his extended career as a professor and researcher. This leads us to conclude that not only was this tintype taken at Harvard Medical School during Edgar's time there, but that it is possible that the individual it belonged to lived and died locally, contemporary to that time as well, and that the specimen may still be in the possession of the Warren Museum. Today, most medical specimens you will see were imported from India largely before the mid-1980s. Human remains were exported from India to medical colleges, mostly in England, as early as the 1850s, but these imported remains did not become prevalent in the United States until later. We knew of the India bone trade from our previous work with medical specimens, but learning about the secretive body snatching by the professors and students themselves was a fascinating twist to this mystery. Given that the consulting anthropologists varied in their estimates on possible ancestry, we decided to begin to sketch the shapes of the features based on the cues of the skull alone. This person seems to have features often seen in African American or mixed-race individuals. Historical context surrounding some of the ways in which Harvard Medical School and other medical schools of the era were known to acquire medical specimens supports this likelihood. We don't know who this individual was, but we believe that he is indeed most entitled to respect, and this is one small way we can show it. Thank you to the client and her family, the consulting anthropologists, and Jen Morley for assistance with Civil War research. If you do any further research on these topics, please do let us know, and we'll be seeing if the specimen is still in the Warren Museum collection so that we can further examine it in person.